Human Augmentation Examples. I'm going to show you a webinar I gave for the amazing Brave New World conference. And the title of this webinar is The Human Body, the Next Frontier, where I'll dive into the question like what are human augmentation technologies and examples, and what are also the dangers and also some possible solutions for us as mankind.
We see each other a couple of times a year. The first time was at the Singularity University. You were there to do a podcast. You even mentioned the word transhumanism. Then I saw you at Brave New World, because you were, just like me, a big fan. And now you are one of the speakers. Why is this? Well, because you also published your book. It's called Supermens, Superhuman. It was published by Bot Publishers, and that was co-founded by Brave New World. So there are so many lines leading to Peter Joosten. You are a biohacker, a future thinker. I will just get out of your way and give you the spotlight. Enjoy.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
It's the year 2052. And Special Agent J.C. Denton stands next to the Statue of Liberty. And he's stoked because in the building there are terrorists. And the terrorists, they unleash the deadly virus Grey Death onto the world. And I'm excited because I am playing the character J.C. Denton in a computer game. The computer game is called Deus Ex. And I really like the storyline, the action, the suspense. But most of all, in the game Deus Ex, you could buy enhancements and augmentations. For example, you have genetic enhancements, so you can heal faster. You have a sort of exoskeleton legs that will increase your speed and stamina. And you also have an electronic eye, so you can see in the dark. And you can also see far, far away in the distance. That was the year 2000. And now, more than 20 years later, it's my full-time profession and also passion to talk, to investigate, to research the field of human enhancement and human augmentation. I'm fascinated by the technologies, by the methods, but most of all, what's the impact of these human enhancement, of these superhumans on ourselves as human species, on society, and as the world as a whole. And my main point for today, if you have to remember one thing from my talk, it's this. Most of the times, when we think about the future, we envision a world with robots, with artificial intelligence, maybe even with cryptocurrency, holograms, virtual reality, but you're actually missing a thing. So this is what I want you to remember. I want you to remember the Jetsons. No, just joking. The Jetsons is a series made in 1962 by Hanna-Barbera. You might know them from Yabba Dabba Doo, the Flintstones indeed. And this is about a series, not about a family who lived in the past, but in the future. They live in the future, the Jetsons, and they have not only electric cars or self-driving cars, they even have flying cars, and they live up in buildings high up in the sky. But there's one problem. As Professor Michael Bess of the Vanderbilt University states, it's called the Jetson Fallacy. He says it's very unlikely that we'll use progress in science and technology only to change the world around us. We will probably also be using it to change, alter, improve, upgrade, enhance ourselves as humans. So that's the Jetson Fallacy. And actually, there are a couple of methods where you can think about concerning human enhancement, human augmentation. The first one is data. So more and more we are tracking, monitoring our ourselves, our human body, our physical well-being, our mental well-being, even our spiritual or emotional well-being. You're probably familiar with wearing activity trackers or sport watches. I even have a so-called smart ring. So these technologies is getting smaller and smaller. Maybe next up, we're also putting these trackers inside of our body. And related to data is that we also have more and more data about our genes. In almost every cell of our body contains DNA. They're the building blocks of life. So first, we sequence DNA, we analyze DNA, and next up, we can change it. With CRISPR-Cas9 and its successors, we're probably also changing ourselves as human beings. We're going from random mutations and natural selection into an era of non-random mutations and unnatural selection. And they're already doing experiments. You can think of leukemia patients where their blood cells are being altered with CRISPR. There's also a patient being done with modifications on the retina chip. And if you're watching this, you're also probably aware of Zhang Guohe, who modified 2 Chinese babies, Lulu and Nana. So there are already people alive on this planet which were genetically modified. And the third method I want to discuss is our brain. And with our genes, you have the genome, which is like the map of all our DNA information. And with the brain, we have the connectome, like it's the map with all the connections between all the neurons in our brain. And just like with genetics, we don't really, first we analyze, but at one point we also decide we want to change it. Although we don't know a lot about the brain yet. I mean, what are thoughts, how does love work, what is consciousness and free will. But despite that, there are already researchers and also companies working on neurotechnology. You also might know Neuralink, which is quite famous because Elon Musk is one of the backers of that company. And they want to develop brain chips in first instance to help patients with a neurological disease. But next up, they also wanted to increase our cognition and maybe upgrade ourselves. And I think in a sense that's great, because the use of technology is also what makes us human. And we can use these methods to reduce suffering in the world and also increase our well-being. For example, if we can predict certain diseases and prevent them from happening, or also maybe we can cure certain genetic diseases or brain diseases. So that's the second reason. And the third reason is that in one day in the future, we do not have a choice actually. Because one day in the future, be it climate change, be it an asteroid coming to our planet, maybe the sun is getting too hot, but at one day in the future, we as human species, we have to leave this planet. Because this bag of water or this sack of meat, it's really not well adjusted to survive in outer space long term. Because due to radiation and lack of gravity, we actually need to be changing our current physical condition. Will we survive on Mars or even in other galaxies? But how is it that most of the times when we think about this field of human enhancement and human augmentation, we get a little bit sad and depressed and we're thinking about a sort of dystopia, just like in the game Deus Ex I like to play. And that's also one of the arguments that has been made about why we're heading toward a dystopia is that it will lead to an inequality, a difference between the haves and the have-nots, between the rich people who are able to buy this kind of technology and the poor people who cannot afford it. But I think there's something wrong with that argument. Well, not per se wrong with that argument, but the money, this still implies that there is a certain type of idea of democracy. Because if you have the money, if you have the funds, you can buy these types of upgrades. And if not, well, then you are within the have-not category. But there's something wrong with it, because there's a factor which is more important than money. You could say it's beyond money, or even behind money. And that is the power dynamics that arise from these technologies and the impact it will have on our world. I want to mention 3 types of institutions, 3 types of examples. And the first one is companies. Right now, our current relation with technology companies is that we get free services, free email, free social media, free navigation, free. But what do we give in exchange? That's our data. But what if I told you that all these technology companies, they're also investing in or working on or having startups in this field of human enhancement, be it biotechnology, neurotechnology, all these companies are interested in it. So the question is, if our current relationship or our current exchange is data for free services, what will be the exchange of the future? Will they offer free modifications and free augmentation, but in exchange for what? I think that's a major concern of today. The second one is we have to also think about the geopolitical consequences. And of course, when I think about the impact on human enhancement on countries, I think of the title of this conference, Brave New World, the book by Aldous Huxley. But I think a society-wide genetic enhancement, like in Brave New World, that's probably very unlikely. I think a more important risk is that it will lead these developments to a sort of arms race between countries. What if you can see that a certain type of modification or enhancement could lead to less healthcare costs, or maybe that you can increase your productivity because your employees can work longer hours or maybe are increasing their cognition. So wow, that could lead to an arms race between countries, that certain countries are investing in or loosening up their regulations because they want to reach that competitive advantage and strengthen their economic position. And of course, related to the idea of countries is the idea of our army. Because the idea of having super soldiers is also maybe an idea from science fiction. But the question is that really the case? Because the American military organization called DARPA, they are already doing experiments, for example, with modafinil. That's a type of pharmaceutical which they believe could help their soldiers in the field to have less sleep, so they can be on a mission for a longer period or time and stay sharper. And they're also looking into genetic enhancement. So how can they maybe in the future genetically engineer their soldiers that they can withstand dangerous radiation, for example? So we are already in this field, and I think this is dangerous. Just like with artificial intelligence and autonomous drones and weapons, we could see the same happening to the human body with these kind of super soldiers. And even one of the world leaders at this moment is worried. And I can understand if your Russian language skills are not up to date. So if that's the case, I would invite you to also read the subtitles. But this is what Vladimir Putin has to say about genetic enhancement at a conference in 2017. Oh, wow, even Vladimir Putin, to my surprise actually, is a little bit afraid of what these genetically enhanced soldiers could mean to our world. And he says it could be even more dangerous than the atomic bomb. So I think maybe at this moment you're also sitting at your computer a little bit depressed or sad because you're thinking, well, Peter, we're actually heading into that dystopia where you started with the world from Deus Ex. But I also want to mention 3 ideas or concepts for our way forward. And the first one is regulation. Because our current relationship as consumers with technology companies, that shows us one thing, that we as individual consumers and also the companies themselves, they are not really prone for change. We need regulation, I think, also on the domain of data and privacy, but also on the areas that are coming our way of genetically enhancing ourselves, of human enhancement, human augmentation. And preferably, we also do it on an international scale, because otherwise we are getting swept into that arms race I told you about. So maybe we should strive for the same kind of cooperation or institution, just like with after the invention and deployment of the nuclear bomb. So we need international cooperation in this field. And also, because our political leaders cannot make the decision on their own. They also need to know what we as citizens of planet Earth, what are our preferences, what are our wishes and desires, how far are we willing to go? So I think this type of development also asks for a periodic, continuous debate, not only by politicians, but also in the public sphere, on conferences just like this, that we decide for ourselves, do we want an upgrade? And if so, what type of upgrade? And if so, can you see the consequences it will have on your life, but also on the people around you, maybe your relationship with your employer? So I think a debate is very important. And for that debate, we also need a third element. And the third element is that we also need stories. We need not only the factual information about scientific breakthroughs, about technologies. No, we also need stories, be it in games or in books or in series or in films. And we need you, story makers, filmmakers, authors, to come up with your creativity and your imagination to take us away to the future so we can feel how it is to live in that future. And then we can make decisions about if we want to live in that future or not. And also, as one remark for you, please do not forget the Jetson fallacy. So if you're making stories about the future, please also forget that we'll also be changing ourselves as human species. So that's my conclusion. My takeaway, don't forget the Jetson fallacy and think about there's more than money involved in the debate about the future of our species. Because the superhuman is not science fiction anymore. So the question is, Are we ready? And are you ready? Thank you very much.